Everyone. Good afternoon. It's good afternoon to you, but it's really, really early morning here in the United States. Thank you very much. And was it Mahisha? Mahisha, I think. Sachini. Uh, anyway, thank you for the wonderful introduction, and thank you also for inviting me to this wonderful, wonderful, fabulous conference. These are very difficult times, and you're doing this. It's very heartwarming to see all the efforts that you're putting into this. And I want to especially thank Professor Diana Fox. Not only because she invited me for this keynote, not only for organizing this conference and especially holding it in Sri Lanka as the center, but also for her tireless service to in the field of transnational feminism and social justice. Well, and thank you all for tuning in from all over the world. I hope you and yours are healthy and safe wherever you are in the world. Well, when we first talked about this keynote, I have provided Diana with a few themes, and they all sounded a lot fancier than the title that you are seeing right now. Of course, I'm sure most of you can guess why it suddenly became something about COVID-19 pandemic and the whole tragedy unfolding in South Asia, and especially in India. And most of the other South Asian countries are kind of sitting on this very crucial juncture right now, especially Sri Lanka. So about a week or two ago, when Mahisha was pressuring me to give a firm final title, I felt that I cannot talk about anything else without connecting that to the pandemic because of its timeliness. So I thought I would connect COVID-19 pandemic with the global production networks, which is my specialized area, and then connecting it to transnational feminism, because that's what this conference is all about. So these are kind of interconnected, but at the same time divergent themes. So in a way, you may feel like the structure of this keynote is a little bit unfamiliar, but please bear with me. It all comes together at the end. So, I promise. I would like to share my screen. So let me try to do that. Okay. So this is that it's taking time to come up, but this is that non-fancy title that I was talking about. Well, I put gains in parentheses for very good reasons, as you can see, because there is that myth or there's the illusion of like gains, but it might not be so. I will talk about that as we move on with the presentation. And like I said, it's still coming. I'm gonna start with these, the book covers of two of my books, not only because I'm very proud of these beautiful covers, but also because it's very, very, very much connected to what I'm gonna talk about today. And so this first book, Stitching Identities in a Free Trade Zone, to my right, was done through an in-depth study, ethnographic study of Katunaika Free Trade Zone in Sri Lanka. So my research was in global garment factories. And whereas this latest book, 2020 book, Restitching Identities in Rural Sri Lanka, follows the same global factory workers after they have finished their short period of working in the free trade zones, and when they go back to their native villages and then very quickly getting married and um, moving to their husbands' villages, because most of them, in fact, move to their husbands' villages. They are also more or less kind of, similar villages to their own. I will now talk a little bit about this 2020 book as a precursor to then talking about COVID-19 and what is happening with certain groups of workers. And there are two very simple questions, simple yet complex questions I ask in this book. And one is, are former global factory workers neoliberal subjects? And then, is neoliberalism hegemonic? I'm not going to focus very much on these things, but I really have to explain a little bit about the research. So I included a definition here of, who is a neoliberal subject, but this audience, of course, does not really need a definition on this. But let me just talk about the free trade zone area as a hotbed for gig economy and training in entrepreneurship, and of course, promotion of aspirational capital, and thus helping these women, global factory workers, develop neoliberal ethos. This just does not come as like NGO workshops, the government support work and just, skills upgrading that most of the global assembly lines or the Western companies are talking about. It also, especially in Sri Lanka, this is a very specially to Sri Lanka, that it has a very interesting stipulation which comes at the policy level, and which is a financial motivation for developing neoliberal ethos. This is what free trade zone workers call informally as free trade zone dowry, because the Board of Investment of Sri Lanka, or the BOI, which is the governing body for the free trade zones in Sri Lanka, from the very beginning, since 1978, had this very clear stipulation that if women work in global factories in the free trade zones for a certain number of years, first it was 5 years and now it's even lesser, when they leave, and if they provide a marriage certificate within 3 months of leaving their factory work, then they can obtain their EPF and ETF savings. And these are Employees Provident Fund and Employees Trust Fund savings, together with the factory gratuity payment. And so this all, in fact, adds up to quite a large sum, considering, they're not getting very good salaries. And so the idea is that they need to get married, and if they miss this window of 3 months, which is a very restrictive period of time, then they have to wait till 55 years of age. Normally when these workers leave, they are either 23 to 26, 7 years of age. So it's like a 30-year wait. And countries like Sri Lanka, the inflation is really high. And as the workers say that in like 30 years with this money, I can only buy like a cup of tea. So it's a very astute economic decision to get this money at this time. The idea, the narratives and discourses surrounding this amount of money is that this is going to be a financial support for these female workers to start some kind of a business, a home income generating activity in their villages, and thus leading to rural development. So the now it's almost 40 years since the first free trade zone, not almost, in fact, more than 40 years. So the villagers themselves, the rural people, have come to understand the money that former government workers bring to marriages as something that the government had given to them to start a business. This is not to say that there have not been abuses, but it's very different to a conventional dowry, because this is given in her name in a bank account, and she has to sign several forms, and it comes with that set of discourses saying, this is for her and to start a business. Again, it's a very patriarchal stipulation, and the assumption is that every woman wants to get married when they're done with working, and it pushes young workers after a few years of work back to their villages and to conventional lives, quote unquote. But this free trade zone dowry, as it is called, kind of make the difference between a former global factory worker versus non-former worker when it comes to the success of their enterprises in rural areas. So although they develop this neoliberal ethos, as it normally happens when they go back to their villages, these ethos have to clash with already existing social norms. And I have studied 37 former global factory workers very deeply for a long time to see how they kind of manipulate the different forms of capital that they do have. And then what I have found was that there is that 1 to 3 years of waiting period when former workers create that supportive female community that they really need to succeed as local entrepreneurs. And this includes, performing very rigid forms of social conformity and kind of saying, I was not part of the colorful, rebellious free trade zone lives, and I'm very normative and I'm a very good girl or young woman. They do, in fact, become successful entrepreneurs. I do have some numbers, which if anyone wants to, we can talk about later. And most of these successful former global factory workers are very much connected to the global production networks, but at the lowest rung of the global production networks, as the global assembly lines are about subcontracting. This is Western companies subcontracting their manufacturing to countries in the global south, and then these countries having these free trade zones or export processing zones or economic zones, whatever the name that particular country is using. They have bigger established factories. Well, they take these orders from the Western and affluent countries, and then they sometimes subcontract some of the work to bigger subcontracting factories just outside the free trade zones or whatever the zones. And then those middle-level companies then subcontract some of the work to smaller factories around like the perimeter of the zones. And then they subcontract to like, kind of icky small workshops, and then it kind of the next level would be home workshops run by women from their own homes. So this is really a cascading system, starting from the orders from the Western countries, then connecting to these rural households. But they become successful because, unlike with other businesses and income generating activities that they can develop, these are well paid, and these orders, at least before the pandemic, had been very steady. And so they had kind of like a leg up from other women who are also into like doing something from home and earning money, because agricultural communities are suffering for cash flow and other kind of economic need. So in fact, this photo is also of one of those home workshops, one of the former global factory workers who had started a home workshop, and this one is a lot more clear. This woman, I knew her from her own global factory in Katunaika, in the Katunaika Free Trade Zone. She was in fact a very good factory worker and was loved by her supervisors and managers, and she had been earmarked for like 2 years and given a lot of encouragement. When you leave and get married, you need to start this workshop. And so what she did was, because she had been given certain promises, she got one industrial sewing machine, which is kind of expensive, using her own savings. And then the factory matched that with another machine. And then sometime later, they donated another kind of an used machine to her. And then she later was able to obtain another machine. So she gets orders, subcontracts from her, not just like through the cascading system, but she's circumvent and she gets these orders from the bigger free trade zone factory because of her personal connections. And then she is a worker, and it's very exploited. I would talk about it, but then she's not only a worker, but she's also an employer, because she herself subcontracts some of her work to other village women who either come in and sew with using her own machines, or take the material with them to their village homes, and use their own machines. So they are workers slash employers of this kind of global subcontracting system. Very interesting situation, but at the same time, this is very much structured in a way beneficial to the Western companies, because they get these women slaving in their villages. Yes, they are paid very well for each piece that they produce. They do have to agree to certain targets, and they're very like just-in-time production. It's like, we want 1,000 pieces of this one little piece within 24 hours. So it's very stressful when they get these big subcontracting orders. But then they get paid, but that's all they get. No benefits, no retirement, no medical benefits, and whatever the health problems that they would get from this kind of work and stress, their families have to absorb those costs. And also the environmental pollution and those things have to be absorbed by the communities that they're living in, because some of the work involved dyeing yarn. So there's dye involved, and the women who work on these, and they always have this, colored hands, and who knows, what happens down the road with that kind of chemical contact. But she calls this her factory, and her community and the other women also calls it like Naina's factory. So in a way that they gain a lot of like, psychic advantages, like, self-esteem, because they are the owners of these means of production. However exploitatively constructed and structured, they gain a lot of economic success. And of course, we can talk a lot about how the global production networks are kind of putting so much burden on village women, and it's very unrecognized how unequally these relationships are structured. But the situation is that, let me take this thing out, they do become successful entrepreneurs. Not only that, they kind of leverage that success into community leadership. So these are like local civic organizations. These 37 women that I studied, very interestingly, um, if you talk to them, they are the office bearers of like so many different village organizations. They have their fingers on everything, like the village women's society, the Mahila Samiti, the mutual help society, the almsgiving society, the temple lay people's society. If there is a society, they are either the chairperson, or the treasurer or secretary, something like that. And so it's also kind of like a circular relationship, because the community leadership then help them more in developing their own enterprises as well. Because of this leadership situation, they are slowly changing gender norms, especially in the rural Sri Lanka, and also moving certain social status hierarchies. So positive change is happening. And if you're thinking of, these are younger women, they are 25 to 35 years of age. Now they are of course getting into close to 40. Some of them, but newer ones are coming in, and they're still in their social reproductive ages. They are not menopausal women. In Sri Lanka, the menopausal women have been respected a lot, and some women have been able to become community leaders, especially school teachers, former school teachers. But working class women and younger women becoming community leaders, and usually these meetings are held in temples, and so these women still running very nicely and very forcefully running these meetings in temple sermon halls with still breastfeeding their infants, and the monks around. So a lot of things are changing, and and it's just like this clash of neoliberal ethos and existing social norms are kind of producing producing a set of new prescriptions for social lives, and it includes a reinterpretation, emergent reinterpretation of who is a good young wife and mother. So good young wife mother in these villages are not just a shy, retiring, religious, kind woman who's like the goddess of the household, who takes care of elderly, who care for children, who's a good faithful wife to her husband, but also someone who's bringing income to the household and also prestige via the community leadership. And you must be, this immediately kind of brings images of double duty. It does seem like, they are expected to be super women now, work outside, bring money home, at the same time still be good young wives and mothers. But when you do long-term, very in-depth ethnographic research, you can see that there's like a nuanced play. The more that a woman becomes successful in her community activities and her business, she starts transferring most of her domestic social reproductive activities, and here I'm talking about cooking and cleaning, and care of elderly and children, to other women. And that's why it was important for them to, in the beginning, to create that supportive female community. And so in a way, they are creating another oppressive system. Okay, now they're not engaging in domestic activities. That is done by women who do not have the money to start their own enterprise, or women who have tried to do that and then had become unsuccessful and fallen from whatever the status that they had before. Um, so so that's one thing. And then, of course, there is a reinterpretation of who is a good entrepreneur as well. So now things are changing, that the Sri Lankan countryside is accepting women, younger women, especially, as, they can be good entrepreneurs, but not all women, because some of the non-migrant women also try to start income generating activities, but because they do not have that financial or the monetary leg up that women get through that EPF, ETF, and yeah, informally called the free trade zone dowry. It's very hard for them to succeed with, especially competing with former global workers. I included feminist political economy approaches here, where, I critique such approaches for being too restrictive and not including this kind of, alternative successful creation of meaningful social economic lives in countryside, just because they are done within capitalist projects and in unequal relationships. But that's not something that I'm going to focus on here. Let's move on to the next slide. So after saying all that, going back to the question, is neoliberalism hegemonic? I'm asking this because of David Harvey's 2007 statement that it is. And, Sri Lanka, as one of a country that's in the global south, and looking at how neoliberalism really is playing out in the global south. So what I have found through my research is that that these women are not exactly neoliberal subjects in the way that that it was defined in the West, because their entrepreneurial activities involves considerations beyond profit maximization and includes an array of decisions and actions based on non-market related concerns such as love, care, and duty. I coined this term, the politics of contentment, to refer to the decisions, actions and strategies for manipulating available resources to attain happy, content, domestic, and village lives. Resisting the conventional understanding of contentment as resigned and contained, I highlight the political value of pursuing individual, family, and community contentment. It is also a local expression of intersectional politics, because these women do not want to understand feminism the same way as the Western hegemonic feminist discourses are defining it. They understand their rights, and they do understand that they need to find empowering moments as they live their lives. But at the same time, they see their husbands and other male members of their communities as also poor people, marginalized people who have been wronged by the elites and the middle classes and the politicians. So they want to develop as a family unit, as husband and wife, not only extended family, as well as the community. So we can talk about that also later if we have time. Contentment both sustains the individual and unites the self and the other to provide a foundation of positive affect that facilitates political achievements, because what they have achieved in changing gender norms and of course reinterpretation of who is a good entrepreneur and the social hierarchical changes, all these are political achievements. And this politics of contentment in fact helped them later when the pandemic broke out and things have changed. So we will kind of move on to that with the next slide. Oh. Oh, okay, here it is. Interestingly, I start with the second wave of the pandemic in Sri Lanka, not with the first one, because Sri Lanka managed that very well. Um, but the second wave started in early October 2020, and it kind of broke out in one of the big subcontracting factories just outside the free trade zone called Brandix, and then this Brandix cluster grew to be really huge at that time. Now it seems minuscule, but at that time it felt like a lot. And these most of the free trade zone workers who got the infection were treated really badly, and because they have been already stigmatized as women who have moved away from their families and living alone and running around wild, quote unquote, as some of the neighbors call them. And so some of the factories had to be closed down for months, and some had to be like, half capacity just to contain the infections. At that time, in fact, these women's rights have been violated, and most of the NGO writings show the police, the military, and even the PHIs kind of treating them as criminals, like, they have done something really bad to get this infection, while it later came out, in fact, people have been sniffling and coughing and generally being sick for weeks, and but the factory still wanted them to keep working, therefore kind of infecting others. So it just shows the relentless pursuit of monetary profits, and how it's like, taken as a lot more important than human well-being. And again, this rights violations, such as, haphazardly taking women in buses to like far away quarantine centers and then just quarantining them in small, non-ventilated or poorly ventilated boarding rooms without providing them any provisions for 2 weeks, and just speaking to them in really bad language and all sorts of things. And this kind of, harks back to that earlier anxieties of trade deregulation, that it is going to bring moral deregulations and that causing moral panic. And being expressed as like, expecting young women to be more and more rigidly behaving in normative mainstream ideals of like a good woman. Now it's the panic about contamination, and it is expressed as animosity toward women workers and other marginalized groups, namely poor Muslim people who live in very crowded, congested areas. And while all these things are happening, starting from March 2020 onwards, the global production chains and networks were unraveling as well. And the cost of this unraveling is in fact borne by the gendered bodies of global assembly line workers. Here are some of the numbers. Between March to May 30th, Sri Lanka's apparel exports fell, we need to go back, 50% against the same period in the previous year. And so you can look at the numbers here, it does not look good at all. But then this is not just in Sri Lanka, it was throughout the global south and the poor countries which engage in subcontracting activities, because when COVID-19 struck, stores closed across North America and Europe, and therefore Western brands canceled their orders with billions of dollars, leaving shipments of clothing which have already been done with no takers. This was very hard on the factory owners and stakeholders in the global south. Hundreds of factories, therefore, across Asia had to be closed, including Vietnam, China, and Bangladesh. And this led to millions of garment workers, vast majority of them women, being laid off and depriving them of $6 billion in wages, which is a huge number. And this is going to have a great impact on the countrysides of these particular countries. And furthermore, in the West, JCPenney, Neiman Marcus, and other chains have filed for bankruptcy, and the chain reaction from this could cause 20% to 30% of companies along the value chain, from brands to wholesalers and department stores, to close down, affecting numerous job levels, not just global assembly line work, but managerial work as well. And so many factory owners in the global south are finding it difficult to recover payments from major brands and retailers who demanded deep discounts for goods that were already in production or ready for shipment. That's a very unfair situation, because it's kind of, rather than sharing the fallout, it was asked to be borne by these global south factories. So these major subcontractors are anxious about not having a pipeline of new orders and the prospect of Western companies nearshoring production. This is the idea that, Western companies would strategically move manufacturing closer to their own shores. So for the United States, it would be, or North America, it would be Mexico. And for Europe, it would be poorer Eastern European countries, and Turkey, Morocco, and that kind of. So if you are having sympathy for factory owners in these global south countries, we have to think again, because they do transfer the fallout then onto the workers' backs. So there are many women who have not been paid for months of work, or they have been paid only half, and no incentives, no bonuses. They were kind of threatened with, like, this is all we have, and you have to keep us afloat by accepting maybe 50% of the basic salary, and so it's the poorest and the lowest rung of these subcontracting production or manufacturing that who bears the brunt of this global production chains unraveling. So this is just to talk about two groups of workers: daily hired workers and home workers. Home workers are the ones that I earlier talked about, who own these home workshops. Daily hired workers are the ones who do not belong to a regular workforce of a factory. Rather, they get hired every day to finish a particular kind of work, and they get paid well for that day, but they do not get any other benefits, retirement or EPF, ETF payments, nothing like that. Just to show how the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown and the global production chains malfunctioning affected the workers, I would just present these two workers' statements. And my auntie is a daily hired worker, and she told me in June 2020, and my research was done entirely through phone, Zoom, and WhatsApp conversations. And she told me, we did choose part-time work on our own. It paid well, and I liked the freedom to some days not work. Corona made me realize how precarious my livelihood was. I haven't had work for 63 days and had to be in line to get some food handouts. Never thought I would fall this low, because these are very hardworking women who would like to earn honest livelihood. It's just that they did not have any opportunity to do so. Um, and Aruni is a home workshop owner about whom I talked in very glowing terms earlier. But after the pandemic, this is what she told me in August 2020. You know how well I was managing my workshop. So I did not think twice before getting microloans to buy the tuk-tuk, the motorbike, and even spending money on house construction and family celebrations. Now there are no orders and no income. Remember, we talked about how the subcontracting system is a cascading system. So if there are no orders for bigger free trade zone factories, then there are no subcontracting for the others. And so they don't have any more orders. Um, and and so no income, and but the creditors have not gone away. They come and ask for monthly payments at all times and all places. So embarrassing. I feel like ending this useless life. So these quotations really show how deep the economic fallout and the resulting social fallout for these two different kinds of workers. And I would like to say something about modern slavery, because this is a huge, like a hotbed for modern slavery, forms of modern slavery to thrive. Because most of these workers, like my auntie, who didn't have 63 days of work, they were so desperate for work that they would take any work, even if it is 50% or 75% of the salary, for a full day of work. And if that is not modern slavery, I don't know what is. And in fact, unofficially, the government had given BY and government had given its blessing to this, because they do want people to have some kind of work, and the factories to have some profits as well. And these women are not given any bonuses or incentives, no guaranteed annual leave and other benefits. And of course, major religious holidays denied, and especially the Thai Pongal Day that is normally given to Hindu workers as an off day was denied. And the workers would go to work thinking that they would work 10 hours, but suddenly they would be asked to work 15 hours. And if they refuse, then they do not have a job, because there's a line of workers outside waiting to be hired daily. And this had led to some workers engaging in sex work to make ends meet, because the basic salaries are so pecuniary. The only way for global factory workers to make ends meet is to have regular bonuses and incentives that are added to their work, their pay packet. And without that, they are in big trouble. So there's another way that women fall into sex work unwillingly.
based on what we said. No, either
So anyway, I'm hearing some other person talking, but I guess that's a mistake. Anyway, sex is another way that that women fall to sex work, and that is like loan repayment in kind that the village loan collectors are engaging in right now. Some people have already told me that moves had been made against them and they have not yet fallen, but some other women have done that. So if we are talking about modern slavery, there was the Modern Slavery Act of 2015, and there were a lot of steps taken to eradicate modern slavery from the global supply chains. But I think the COVID-19 pandemic and the aftermath had taken whatever the progress that had been made, it reversed it to like maybe a decade before levels, which is a very, very sad situation. Um, the other situation is that we were talking about how precarious this work is. And of course, whether it's precarious or not, women had gained a lot of things, even without their success in the villages. When they come to urban areas to work in these global factories, um, they develop new senses of selves, they develop working class consciousness, rudimentary forms of feminist thinking and feminist ideas, and social freedom and things like that. These are social gains. But this situation with the COVID-19 and the lockdown and the economic fallout had shown how precarious work brigades only precarious social gains. And in March, when women were let go without their salaries, and they had gone to the villages, and their loved ones accepted them, but as weeks went on and the food insecurities had settled in, the verbal, emotional, and physical abuse within families and communities started, and women were asked to go back and do whatever in the urban areas when they themselves felt like, they were not ready and the country is not safe. Um, then they were told, like, you're lazy, you do not think about your family, and you're just one more mouth to feed. And so lots of, they have really lost some of the social gains, um, together with their income. So in a way, however exploitatively structured, free trade zone work in fact afford female workers more respect and dignity within conjugal relationships. And it also elevates attitudes about women within the kinship unit. And then those things were reversed as well for the most part. Um, the pandemic related experiences of current workers showed how such social gains can be just as precarious as the women's global factory work. But one positive uh, aspect is that home workshop owners felt that the empowerment that they felt and the empowering moments they experienced, that they were not completely lost, but it had provided them with like a lot of know-how and strength and courage, and provided foundation for positive action. And that's where the politics of contentment comes into play. If they have engaged in politics of contentment rather than being too interested in profits and not caring for the families and communities, then they would be falling a lot more further. But since they have cultivated good community relationships, um, these established home workshop owners felt that they still have a foundation to work with.
Excuse me, Professor Sandya, I'm so sorry, but we are actually out of time. It just
Okay.
zoomed by. So what I'm proposing, maybe you could just wrap up and pull together some thoughts. What I'm proposing is that I've cut and pasted some of the questions, and that I can send them to you, and we can do a kind of Q&A interview that we can post as a blog on the AAAWGS website. So hopefully that's okay with you.
It is.
Okay.
It's very much okay with me, and I'm sorry if I had gone over the time. And I do have the time here, and it's not yet 40, but it's okay. And I'm going to wrap up right now.
Thank you.
Transnational feminism and future of collaboration, because that is what we are talking about in this conference. So these are 5 trends emerging as a result of the pandemic, which I am going to, the number 5 is the most important one: repurposed advocacy groups. And we can think about how transnational feminism and feminist networks can be part of what is happening in the global South. And so here are some thoughts about what's going to happen with mutual aid and welfare provisions, and so this need-based engagement have the potential to strengthen links between national and international civil society, as well as between formally organized civil society organizations and community-based groups. And it's also important that um, um, that it might, importance of organized civil society action. And this is a good opportunity for progressive transnational networks such as transnational feminist networks to connect with varied partners from the global south. But it's important to also not go with elite middle class urban civil society groups, but to reach out to more grassroots and organically grown local organizations. And this is the final slide. And there's one such organization which I see developing into a organic economic justice movement. It's called Village Subcontractors Association, which was in fact put together few months before the pandemic struck in March last year. And of course, they went into a deep dark mode for like few months, and then they kind of regrouped, and there's a web page and WhatsApp group, and it's a marketing platform, and they have a branch for women against microloans. They're petitioning the president for a moratorium on loan payments. And so I have two questions before I stop to further thinking. And how can such an organization be part of and supported by transnational feminist networks? And how can we support and champion locally grown economic and social justice movements? Well, with that very uplifting slide, I'm going to stop my keynote. Thank you very much.